I remember the exact moment my world crumbled beneath my feet. Standing in my own living room in Millbrook Heights, surrounded by the family I'd sacrificed everything for, when my eldest daughter Penelope looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, we're adults now. We don't need you anymore. Stop trying to control our lives with your money." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 43 years of putting my children first, after working 3 jobs to put them through private school, after mortgaging my house twice to pay for their college educations, after spending my entire inheritance from my parents on their weddings, their down payments, their emergency funds, this was my reward. To be told I was unnecessary, unwanted, a burden they'd finally outgrown. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been planning to leave them everything, my entire estate worth just over $2.8 million, carefully built through decades of 16-hour workdays and strategic investments. By the end of this story, that money would be going somewhere they never could have imagined. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt unappreciated by the people you love most, make sure you're subscribed, because this story will show you exactly what happens when entitled children push their mother too far. My name is Dorothy Whitfield, and at 67, I thought I'd earned some respect from my family. I'd raised 4 children as a single mother in the small town of Cedarville after their father abandoned us when my youngest, Jasper, was only 3 years old. That was back in 1985, when being a divorced woman with 4 kids meant you were practically invisible to most decent job opportunities. So I made my own opportunities. I started a small catering business from my kitchen, working 18-hour days preparing meals for local events, office parties, and wedding receptions. Every penny I earned went straight into my children's futures. While other mothers my age were taking weekend trips or buying themselves nice clothes, I was reinvesting in commercial kitchen equipment and saving every dollar for my kids' educations. Penelope, my firstborn, wanted to study art history at Brookfield University, a prestigious private school with a $45,000 annual tuition. I made it happen. Theodore wanted to become a lawyer at Eastmont College of Law, another $50,000 a year. I found a way. My daughter Cordelia dreamed of medical school at Riverside Medical College, and Jasper insisted on studying engineering at Westfield Tech. 4 children, 4 expensive educations, and somehow I managed to pay for every single credit hour without them taking on a penny of student debt. By the time they all graduated, I'd spent over $800,000 on their educations alone. My catering business had grown into 3 successful restaurants across the county, and I was finally starting to build some real wealth for myself. I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud of the successful adults my children had become. Penelope became a museum curator in the city, Theodore joined a prestigious law firm, Cordelia established her own medical practice, and Jasper landed a high-paying job with a major engineering corporation. They were all living comfortable, upper-middle-class lives, and I thought we'd finally reached the point where we could enjoy our success together, as a family. I was so very wrong. The first crack in our relationship appeared 3 years ago at Theodore's wedding. I'd offered to contribute $25,000 toward the reception, thinking it was a generous gesture from a proud mother. Instead of gratitude, I got a lecture from Theodore's fiancé about how they were perfectly capable of funding their own wedding and didn't need my charity. Theodore just stood there, nodding along, while this woman who'd known him for all of 18 months dismissed my offer like I was some meddling stranger. But I swallowed my hurt and wrote the check anyway when they inevitably came asking for help with the venue deposit 2 weeks later. The pattern continued with Cordelia's house purchase. She needed $75,000 for a down payment on a home in Pinehurst Estates, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the state. When I offered to help, she sighed heavily and said, "I suppose that would be acceptable, though we were hoping to do this ourselves," as if my financial support was somehow diminishing her achievement. Then came Jasper's business venture. He wanted to start his own consulting firm but needed $150,000 in startup capital. Again, I was treated like his assistance was some kind of burden he had to accept, rather than a gift from a mother who believed in his dreams. And Penelope, sweet Penelope, who used to call me every Sunday, hadn't spoken to me in 6 months because I dared to suggest that maybe spending $8,000 on a purse wasn't the wisest financial decision for someone still paying off credit card debt. The breaking point came last month during what was supposed to be a family dinner at my house. I'd spent all day preparing their favorite meals, setting the table with my grandmother's china, hoping we could finally have an honest conversation about our increasingly strained relationships.
Instead, I got an intervention. They'd apparently been talking behind my back, coordinating their concerns about my controlling behavior and financial manipulation. According to them, every gift I'd given, every check I'd written, every sacrifice I'd made was actually me trying to control their lives and keep them dependent on me. "We've talked about this extensively," Penelope announced, speaking for all 4 of them like some kind of designated spokesperson. "We appreciate everything you've done, but we're adults now. We don't need you anymore. We can take care of ourselves." That's when Theodore chimed in with the killing blow. "Honestly, Mom, your constant offers of money make us feel like you don't think we're capable of success on our own." I sat there, stunned into silence, as my 4 children, the people I'd given my entire life to, essentially told me that my love, my support, my very presence in their lives was unwanted interference. But what came next would change everything, and they had no idea what they'd just set in motion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I never imagined that at 67 years old, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about motherhood, about sacrifice, and about the children I'd devoted my entire adult life to raising. But before I tell you about the shocking discovery that changed everything, you need to understand who I really am, and more importantly, what I gave up to become the mother my children apparently no longer need. My story begins in 1978 in the small manufacturing town of Cedarville, population 12,000, where dreams were as scarce as good-paying jobs. I was Dorothy Mae Hartwell back then, a 24-year-old newlywed married to Russell Whitfield, a charming car salesman who promised me the world and delivered disappointment instead. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom rental on Maple Street, where the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbor's television through the bedroom wall. When Penelope was born in 1979, I thought Russell would finally grow up, take responsibility, become the family man I'd married him hoping he'd become. Instead, he started staying out later, drinking more, and contributing less to our household expenses. By the time Theodore arrived 18 months later, Russell was already talking about feeling trapped by family responsibilities. But I was determined to make it work. I'd grown up watching my own mother struggle as a single parent after my father died in a factory accident, and I was terrified of repeating that cycle. So I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother, cooking elaborate meals, keeping our little house spotless, working part-time at Henderson's grocery store while managing 2 babies under the age of 2. Cordelia came along in 1982, and by then Russell barely pretended to be present for our family. He'd disappear for entire weekends, claiming he was networking or building his sales territory. I knew he was probably with other women, but I kept telling myself that things would get better once his business picked up, once the kids got older, once we could afford a bigger house. Jasper's birth in 1984 was the final straw for Russell. 3 months after our youngest son arrived, I came home from my shift at the grocery store to find a note on the kitchen table. "I'm not cut out for this family life. Don't try to find me. R."
He left me with 4 children under the age of 5, $347 in our checking account, and 3 months of unpaid rent.
The breakthrough came in 1987 when Mrs. Pemberton, the wife of Cedarville's bank president, tasted my chocolate chip cookies at the farmer's market and asked if I could cater her daughter's graduation party. It was my first real catering job, 75 guests, full dinner service, and an $800 payment that felt like winning the lottery. Word spread quickly in our small town. Within 6 months, I was catering 2 or 3 events per month out of my tiny kitchen, staying up until 2 a.m. preparing meals while my children slept. By 1990, I'd saved enough money to rent a small commercial kitchen space in the old Riverside Mill building, and Dorothy's Catering was officially born. Those early years were brutal. I worked 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. The children learned to do their homework at folding tables in the commercial kitchen while I prepped vegetables and seasoned meats for upcoming events. Penelope became my unofficial assistant manager at age 12, helping coordinate deliveries and manage inventory. Theodore learned to operate the industrial dishwasher by age 10. Cordelia and Jasper grew up thinking it was perfectly normal to spend Saturday afternoons polishing silverware and folding napkins. But we were building something together. Every successful event meant more referrals, which meant more income, which meant better opportunities for my children. By 1995, I was catering weddings for families from 3 counties over, and I'd saved enough money to put a down payment on a small house on Elmwood Avenue, our first real home. I never remarried, never even dated seriously. Every spare moment, every extra dollar, every ounce of energy I had went into 2 things: building my business and raising my children to be successful adults. While other women my age were going out with friends or taking vacations, I was researching college scholarships and planning menus for weekend events. The business continued to grow throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. I opened my first restaurant, Dorothy's Kitchen, in downtown Cedarville in 1998. 2 more locations followed in nearby Riverside and Brookamont. By 2010, I was employing 47 people across 3 restaurants and still handling private catering for the region's most prestigious events. More importantly, I was achieving my real goal: giving my children opportunities I'd never had. Penelope graduated valedictorian from Cedarville High and earned a full scholarship to supplement the tuition I paid at Brookfield University. Theodore was accepted into Eastmont College of Law with academic honors. Cordelia excelled in pre-med at Riverside Medical College, and Jasper's engineering degree from Westfield Tech launched him into a lucrative career. I was so proud of them. So proud of what we'd built together as a family. I thought all those years of sacrifice had been worth it when I watched each of them walk across their graduation stages. I thought I'd succeeded in breaking the cycle of struggle that had defined my own childhood. But as they established their adult lives and careers, something began to change. The gratitude I'd expected never quite materialized. Instead, there was an increasing sense that my continued presence in their lives was more burden than blessing. I told myself it was natural, healthy even, for adult children to establish independence from their parents. But deep down, I was starting to suspect there was something more troubling happening, something that would soon become impossible to ignore. What I discovered about my independent children would shatter every assumption I'd made about the family I thought I'd raised. The first time I met Penelope's husband, Nathan Blackstone, I should have trusted my instincts. It was Christmas Eve 2018, and I'd invited the whole family to my house on Elmwood Avenue for our traditional holiday dinner. Penelope had been dating Nathan for about 8 months, and this was his first time meeting the extended family. He walked through my front door like he owned the place. Expensive cashmere coat, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a Rolex that caught the light every time he gestured. Nathan was undeniably handsome in that polished investment banker way, with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never encountered a problem his family's money couldn't solve.
You know, Dorothy, may I call you Dorothy? I have to say, your children are remarkably well adjusted considering their, shall we say, humble beginnings. It's quite admirable how they've elevated themselves beyond their circumstances. The backhanded compliment hung in the air like smoke. Theodore cleared his throat uncomfortably, but no one said anything to challenge Nathan's condescending assessment of our family's background.
What disturbed me most wasn't Nathan's obvious sense of superiority. I'd dealt with entitled rich people before through my catering business. What bothered me was how my children seemed to shrink in his presence, like they were embarrassed by the very foundation of their success. Over the following months, Nathan became an increasingly prominent fixture in our family gatherings. And with his influence came subtle but noticeable changes in how my children viewed themselves and their upbringing. Penelope started making comments about wanting to upgrade her lifestyle. She traded in her reliable Honda Civic for a BMW lease she couldn't afford. Her modest apartment was suddenly too small and not in the right neighborhood. She began shopping at stores where a single handbag cost more than I used to make in a month. When I gently suggested she might want to slow down on the spending, she laughed it off. "Mom, you don't understand. Nathan's world operates differently. Image matters. Presentation matters. I need to fit in with his colleagues and clients." The engagement happened faster than anyone expected. Nathan proposed to Penelope during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard in July 2019 with a ring that must have cost $30,000. The announcement came with an immediate expectation that the wedding would be held at the prestigious Fairmont Country Club, where Nathan's family had been members for 3 generations. "It's going to be absolutely magical," Penelope gushed during our first wedding planning meeting at my house. "Nathan's mother, Vivian, has such exquisite taste. She's already put us in touch with the best wedding planner in the city." I noticed she didn't ask for my input on any of the major decisions. Everything was filtered through Nathan's family's preferences, their social circle, their expectations. When I suggested some cost-saving alternatives or offered to provide the catering through my restaurants, Penelope looked mortified. "Oh, Mom, that's sweet, but Nathan's family expects a certain level of sophistication. No offense, but Dorothy's Kitchen is more of a local, hometown kind of place. This wedding needs to make a statement." The statement, apparently, was that my daughter was ashamed of the very business that had paid for her education and launched her into the life that made her worthy of marrying Nathan Blackstone in the first place. That Nathan's influence extended beyond just Penelope. During family dinners, Nathan began making subtle comments about generational wealth and breaking cycles of limitation. He'd praise my children for transcending their origins, while simultaneously implying that those origins were something to be overcome rather than honored. Theodore started echoing Nathan's language, talking about elevating the family brand and strategic networking. Cordelia began questioning whether she should have gone to a more prestigious medical school. Even Jasper started making comments about wishing he'd pursued an MBA instead of just engineering. The most disturbing moment came during Thanksgiving 2019, just 4 months before that devastating family intervention. Nathan had been drinking wine throughout dinner and was feeling particularly philosophical. "You know what I admire most about your children, Dorothy?" he said, swirling his glass of $30 Bordeaux. "They refuse to accept the limitations of their circumstances. They could have easily stayed here in Cedarville, followed in your footsteps, been content with small-town success, but they had bigger dreams." He gestured expansively toward my 4 adult children, who were all listening intently to his analysis of their lives. "The problem with inheriting family businesses or staying too close to your roots is that it caps your potential. Theodore could have taken over your restaurants, but then he'd just be another small-town restaurant owner. Instead,
He's a respected attorney with a prestigious firm. That's the difference between settling for what's familiar and reaching for what's possible. The implication was clear. Everything I'd built, everything I'd achieved, everything I'd sacrificed to give them opportunities was actually a limitation they needed to escape. When I watched my children nod along with this assessment, something cold settled in my chest. Nathan wasn't just an arrogant rich boy who looked down on our family. He was a poison, slowly convincing my children that everything I'd taught them about hard work, humility, and gratitude was actually holding them back from their true potential. What I didn't realize then was that Nathan was just the catalyst. The real problem ran much deeper than one man's influence on my family. But it would take a shocking discovery about my children's true attitudes toward me to reveal just how far their disrespect had spreaded.
And that discovery was coming sooner than I could have ever imagined. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when our family was at its happiest, when the bond between my children and me felt unbreakable. It was the summer of 2015, 3 years before Nathan entered our lives, and we were celebrating Theodore's graduation from law school with a week-long vacation at Lake Harmony, our first real family trip in over a decade. I had rented a sprawling cabin with 6 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a private dock extending into the crystal-clear water. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. The restaurants were thriving, all 4 children had completed their educations debt-free, and I could finally afford to spoil them the way I'd always dreamed of doing when they were younger. Penelope, then 26, had just been promoted to associate curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts. She spent that entire week showing me pictures on her phone of the Renaissance pieces she was helping to catalog, her eyes lighting up as she explained the historical significance of each painting. "Mom, can you believe this is actually my job?" she kept saying. "I get paid to research and preserve some of the most beautiful art in human history." Theodore, fresh from passing the bar exam, was glowing with pride and possibility. He'd accepted a position with Harrison, Mitchell and Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the state, and couldn't stop talking about the cases he'd be working on. "I'm going to specialize in corporate ethics," he told me as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. "I want to help companies do business the right way, you know? Make sure success doesn't come at the expense of integrity." Cordelia had just completed her residency in pediatrics and was planning to open her own practice. She spent hours that week playing with the neighborhood children who came to swim near our dock, and I watched her natural gift with kids bloom in the relaxed setting. "I can't wait to have my own patients," she said. "There's something so pure about helping children get healthy. It feels like the most important work in the world." And Jasper, my youngest, had recently been promoted to senior project manager at Whitman Engineering. He was working on designing sustainable energy systems for rural communities, combining his technical skills with his desire to make a meaningful difference. "Mom, you should see some of these projects," he said excitedly. "We're bringing clean electricity to places that have never had reliable power before. It's like being part of history." That week at Lake Harmony, we fell back into the easy rhythms of family life that I remembered from when they were children. Cordelia and Penelope cooked breakfast together every morning, arguing playfully about whether pancakes or French toast were superior. Theodore and Jasper spent afternoons fishing from the dock, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to their hopes for the future. Every evening, we gathered on the porch for what became known as our gratitude circle. It started as a joke when Penelope sarcastically suggested we should give thanks like pilgrims. But it quickly became the most meaningful part of each day. We'd go around the circle sharing something we were grateful for, and I was amazed by how thoughtful and heartfelt their responses were. "I'm grateful for Mom's crazy work ethic," Theodore said on our 3rd night. "Watching you build something from nothing taught me that success isn't handed to you. You create it through determination and refusing to give up." "I'm grateful for the way you always believed in our dreams," Cordelia added. "Even when they seemed impossible. Medical school felt so overwhelming sometimes, but knowing you'd already sacrificed so much to get me there
made me push through every difficult moment. Jasper nodded in agreement. I'm grateful for learning that family loyalty means everything. You could have remarried, could have focused on your own happiness, but you chose us every single time. That's the kind of parent I want to be someday. Penelope, who was usually the most reserved about emotional expressions, surprised me that night. She said, I'm grateful for understanding what real strength looks like. Most people think strength is about power or dominance, but you taught us it's about endurance, about showing up even when things are hard, about protecting the people you love no matter what it costs you. I cried that night after they'd all gone to bed, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride and love. This was what I'd worked for, not just their financial success, but their character, their values, their deep appreciation for family bonds. The following day, we decided to hike to Eagles Point, a scenic overlook about 3 miles from the cabin. The trail was challenging, with steep sections and rocky terrain, but we encouraged each other along the way, just like we had during their childhood struggles. At the summit, looking out over the vast expanse of mountains and valleys, Theodore put his arm around my shoulders. You know what's crazy, Mom? All these years, I thought success would feel different. I thought achieving my goals would somehow change who I was inside. But standing here with all of you, I realize the best parts of my life have nothing to do with career achievements. It's this. It's us. It's knowing that no matter what happens, we have each other.
That evening, we barbecued on the porch while a thunderstorm rolled across the lake. Instead of going inside, we sat under the covered area and watched the lightning illuminate the water. Cordelia had brought her old guitar, and we sang songs from their childhood. Silly camp songs, folk ballads I'd taught them, even some pop music from their teenage years. We should do this every year, Jasper said as the storm began to clear. No matter how busy we get, no matter where our careers take us, we should always make time for a family week like this. Everyone agreed enthusiastically. We made plans for the following summer, discussed different locations we could explore, talked about making it a tradition that would continue even when they started families of their own. On our last night at the cabin, Penelope surprised me with a scrapbook she'd been secretly working on all week. It was filled with photos from the trip, but also pictures from their childhood. Report cards I'd saved, newspaper clippings about my restaurant openings, and letters they'd written to me over the years. The final page had a group photo of all 5 of us from that week with a handwritten message. To the strongest woman we know, thank you for teaching us that love is an action, not just a feeling. Thank you for showing us that family is worth any sacrifice. Thank you for being the foundation that makes everything else possible. We love you more than words can express. Your devoted children, Penelope, Theodore, Cordelia, and Jasper. As I read those words, surrounded by my 4 successful, grateful, loving children, I felt like the richest woman in the world. Not because of my business success or my financial security, but because I'd raised human beings who understood the value of family loyalty, who appreciated sacrifice, who recognized that their achievements were built on a foundation of unconditional love. That was the last time I felt truly confident about our family bonds. Within 6 months, small cracks would begin to appear. Within 2 years, those cracks would become chasms. And within 3 years, those same children who had written such beautiful words about family loyalty would be sitting in my living room telling me they didn't need me anymore. But in that moment at Lake Harmony, watching my children laugh together on the porch of our rented cabin, I believed our connection was unbreakable. I believed the values I'd instilled in them were permanent. I believed that love and sacrifice had created bonds that could weather any storm. How naive I was. The first crack in our perfect family facade appeared in March 2016, just 8 months after our magical week at Lake Harmony. It was such a small thing that I almost dismissed it entirely. A comment Penelope made during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for her latest promotion.
I had taken the entire family to Rosalind's, the most expensive restaurant in Cedarville, to celebrate Penelope being named head curator of the Contemporary Art Wing at the Metropolitan Museum. It was a huge achievement, one that put her in charge of a multi-million-dollar collection, and I was bursting with pride. To Penelope, I said, raising my glass of wine, for proving that dreams really do come true when you work hard enough to chase them. Instead of the warm smile I expected, Penelope shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Actually, Mom, I need to be honest about something. The promotion wasn't just about hard work. It was about connections, about being in the right social circles. My Harvard connections opened doors that talent alone never could have. Theodore nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I've been learning at the firm. Merit only gets you so far. It's about who you know, what networks you can access. I felt a small knot form in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Well, regardless of how you got there, you've earned it. You both have worked incredibly hard. Of course, Cordelia chimed in, but we're starting to understand that there are levels of success we never even knew existed. Like, I always thought having my own practice was the ultimate goal, but there are doctors who own entire networks of practices, who serve on hospital boards, who influence healthcare policy. That's the kind of impact I should be striving for. The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, with each of my children describing how their perspectives on success had evolved beyond what they'd originally envisioned. What disturbed me wasn't their ambition. I'd always encouraged them to dream big. What bothered me was the underlying implication that their previous goals, the ones we'd celebrated together, were somehow insufficient. The thing is, Jasper said as we waited for dessert, we've been thinking small, like generationally small. We've been focused on our individual careers instead of building something that could impact our family's legacy for decades. What do you mean? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I wouldn't like the answer. Well, take your restaurants, for example, Theodore said carefully. They're successful, but they're still essentially local businesses. There's nothing wrong with that, but imagine if we could scale that success, franchise the concept, maybe even go public someday. That's the difference between comfortable living and generational wealth.
I stared at my son, the lawyer I'd put through school, the young man who had once told me he valued integrity over profit, as he casually suggested that everything I'd built was thinking too small. My restaurants employ nearly 50 people in this community, I said quietly. They provide good jobs, support local farmers, and serve families who've been coming to us for over 20 years. I'm proud of what I've built. Oh, Mom, we're proud too, Penelope said quickly, reaching across the table to pat my hand. We're just saying there might be opportunities to think bigger, to leverage your success into something even more impactful. The word leverage felt like a slap. When had my children started talking about our family business in corporate buzzwords? The second warning sign came 2 months later, during Mother's Day weekend. I had planned a small gathering at my house, nothing fancy, just family, good food, and time together. But when I called to confirm the details, each of my children had complications. Theodore needed to attend a networking event with senior partners from his firm. It's not optional, Mom. These are the kinds of events that determine partnership track. Surely you understand how important career advancement is. Cordelia had been invited to a medical conference in Chicago that same weekend. It's a huge opportunity to meet physicians from Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic. I can't pass up those kinds of connections. Jasper had committed to a weekend retreat with his company's executive team. We're developing 5-year strategic plans. Missing this could really hurt my visibility with upper management. And Penelope simply said she had priorities without elaborating further. For the first time in 28 years, I spent Mother's Day alone. I told myself it was a coincidence that adult children naturally have busier schedules. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. The pattern continued throughout 2016. Family dinners became increasingly rare, not because of scheduling conflicts, but because of what my children called opportunity costs. Every family gathering was weighed against potential career advantages, social events, or networking possibilities. When I expressed disappointment about missing our traditional Thanksgiving dinner, Theodore actually said, "Mom, we love spending time with you, but we have to be strategic about our social calendar now. The Worthington family invited us to their estate for Thanksgiving. That's the kind of connection that could transform our family's social position." What's wrong with our current social position? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. By Christmas 2016, the changes were impossible to ignore. Gone were the heartfelt gifts and handwritten cards that had characterized our holiday traditions. Instead, I received expensive but impersonal presents: a cashmere scarf from Penelope, a wine collection from Theodore, luxury bath products from Cordelia, and a high-end coffee maker from Jasper. When I opened each gift, they watched my reaction with the polite attention you'd give to a business associate, not the eager excitement I remembered from their childhood Christmases. "These are lovely," I said, trying to match their enthusiasm, "but you didn't need to spend so much money." "We wanted to get you nice things," Cordelia replied. "We can afford it now." The subtext was clear. They were demonstrating their success, their ability to buy expensive gifts, rather than expressing love through thoughtful, personal gestures. During dinner that Christmas, I made what I thought was an innocent comment about family traditions and values. "You know, some of my happiest memories are Christmas mornings when you were little, when we'd make pancakes together and open presents on the living room floor. You were all so excited about the smallest things." "Well, we were children then," Theodore said dismissively. "Our perspectives were more limited. We didn't understand the broader world of possibilities." "Limited?" I repeated. Penelope jumped in quickly. "What Theodore means is that we've grown beyond some of those childhood perspectives. We have a more sophisticated understanding of success now, of what's possible for our family." "And what's possible for our family?" Jasper answered with the confidence of someone who'd given this considerable thought. "We could be influential. Not just locally successful, but regionally, maybe even nationally recognized. The Whitfield name could mean something significant." I looked around the table at my 4 children, these adults I'd raised to value hard work, humility, and family loyalty, and realized they were embarrassed by the very foundation that had made their sophisticated understanding possible. But I rationalized their behavior, the way parents do when they don't want to confront painful truths about their children's character. They were just going through a phase, I told myself. They were young professionals trying to establish themselves in competitive fields. Once they matured a bit more, once they felt more secure in their careers, they'd remember what really mattered. I couldn't have been more wrong. The small cracks I was noticing in 2016 were actually fault lines that would split our family apart completely. And the worst part was, I kept making excuses for behavior that should have been unacceptable from the beginning.
Looking back now, I realize that this was when I should have set firm boundaries, when I should have reminded them where they came from and who had made their success possible. Instead, I enabled their growing sense of entitlement by continuing to rationalize their disrespectful behavior as temporary growing pains. That was my first mistake. It would not be my last. Despite the growing distance I felt from my children, I convinced myself that love meant continuing to support their dreams, even when those dreams seemed to pull them further away from our family values. What happened between 2017 and 2019 would prove to be the most expensive lesson in parental enabling I could have ever imagined. It started with Theodore's wedding in June 2017. He had been dating Miranda Ashworth, a fellow attorney from a prominent Hartford family, for just over a year when they announced their engagement. Miranda was lovely, intelligent, accomplished, and genuinely seemed to care for Theodore. But she came from the kind of old-money Connecticut family where wedding receptions were expected to be featured in society magazines. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding budget," Theodore said during a family dinner in February. "Miranda's family has certain expectations, and I want to make sure we can meet them." I assumed he meant they needed help with some specific expenses, maybe the flowers or the rehearsal dinner, or perhaps a contribution toward the honeymoon.
I was completely unprepared for what came next. The Ashworth family traditionally hosts weddings at their estate in Greenwich, but they expect the groom's family to cover all the vendor costs: catering, music, photography, decorations. It's a family tradition going back 4 generations. The total he quoted made me nearly choke on my wine. $180,000? Theodore, that's more than most people make in 3 years, I said carefully. I know it sounds like a lot, Mom, but this isn't just a wedding. It's an investment in our future. The guest list includes partners from every major law firm in New England, federal judges, state legislators, business leaders. The networking opportunities alone could advance my career by decades. Miranda nodded earnestly. My family's connections could open doors for Theodore that might otherwise take him 20 years to access on merit alone. We're not just celebrating our marriage, we're launching a strategic partnership that could benefit our entire family for generations. There it was again, that language of leverage, of strategic positioning, of viewing personal relationships as business opportunities. But Theodore was my son, and despite my growing concerns about his values, I wanted his wedding day to be perfect. I liquidated $200,000 worth of investments and wrote the check, telling myself this was a one-time expense that would make Theodore happy and help establish his career. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. The Ashworth estate looked like something from a fairy tale, with thousands of white roses, a 12-piece orchestra, and enough champagne to float a yacht. Theodore looked happier than I'd ever seen him, and Miranda was a radiant bride. But what struck me most was how isolated I felt among the guests. These were Theodore's new people, wealthy attorneys, investment bankers, political figures, and they had no interest in getting to know the small-town restaurant owner who had raised the groom. I spent most of the reception sitting alone at my assigned table, watching my son work the room like a politician running for office. 6 months later, Cordelia announced her engagement to Dr. Marcus Pemberton, a cardiovascular surgeon from Boston, whose family owned a chain of private medical facilities throughout New England. Their wedding plans made Theodore's celebration look modest by comparison. Marcus and I have been discussing our wedding vision, Cordelia told me during lunch at her apartment in December 2017. We want to host it at the Oceanfront Resort in Newport. It's where the Vanderbilts used to entertain. Absolutely stunning views and the perfect backdrop for the kind of celebration that reflects our professional standing. The price tag for their vision was $275,000. Cordelia, sweetheart, that's an extraordinary amount of money, I said gently. Her response chilled me. Mom, I'm not asking you to pay for something frivolous. This wedding is an investment in my medical practice. Marcus's family knows every influential physician on the East Coast. The connections I'll make could help me expand into surgical consultation, maybe even open multiple clinics. The return on investment could be enormous. Everything had become transactional. Even her wedding was being framed as a business strategy rather than a celebration of love. But she was my daughter, and I had always promised to support my children's happiness. I took out a home equity loan against my house on Elmwood Avenue and wrote another check.
Again, I felt like an outsider at my own child's wedding, relegated to polite small talk with people who clearly viewed me as quaint but ultimately irrelevant to their sophisticated social circles. The pattern continued with Jasper's engagement announcement in September 2018. His fiancée, Alexandra Hamilton, yes, she claimed to be related to the founding father, came from a family of prominent engineers and architects. Their wedding would be held at the historic Whitmore Mansion, with a guest list that read like a who's who of the Northeast engineering establishment. Cost? $320,000. Jasper, this is getting out of hand, I said when he presented me with the wedding budget. I've already spent nearly $500,000 on your siblings' weddings. This is more than many people's entire net worth. Mom, I understand your concern, but you have to see the bigger picture, Jasper replied, with the patience of someone explaining basic math to a child.
Alexandra's family connections could help me land contracts with major infrastructure projects. We're talking about the possibility of designing bridges, airports, maybe even working on renewable energy initiatives for entire cities. This wedding isn't an expense. It's the most important investment I could possibly make in our family's future. Okay, I see where you're coming from, I said against my better judgment. I liquidated more investments and took out another loan to fund Jasper's extravagant wedding celebration. By the time all 3 weddings were finished, I had spent nearly $800,000, almost a third of my net worth, on celebrations that felt more like business conferences than family gatherings. But the financial cost wasn't even the worst part. What really broke my heart was watching my children transform into people I barely recognized. At each wedding, they were more polished, more sophisticated, and more distant from the values that had once defined our family. They spoke fluently about investment strategies, social positioning, and career advancement, but they had lost the ability to have genuine conversations about happiness, gratitude, or the simple joys of family connection. During Jasper's reception in June 2019, I sat at my designated table, again isolated from the main social action, and watched my youngest son deliver a toast that thanked everyone except the woman who had raised him, educated him, and just funded his $320,000 wedding celebration. "To my beautiful wife Alexandra," he said, raising his champagne glass, "and to her incredible family for welcoming me into their circle of excellence, to the partnerships and opportunities that this union represents, and to the bright future we're building together through strategic relationships and shared ambitions." Not one word about the single mother who had worked 18-hour days to give him the education that made him worthy of marrying into the Hamilton family. As I drove home alone from Jasper's wedding, still wearing the expensive dress I'd bought to fit in with his new social circle, I realized I had been paying for the privilege of watching my children drift further and further away from everything I had taught them about love, loyalty, and family bonds. I had funded their transformation into people who were embarrassed by their origins, who viewed relationships as business opportunities, and who had forgotten that their success was built on a foundation of maternal sacrifice that extended far beyond any financial contribution. The most painful irony was that my generosity had actually accelerated their rejection of our family values. Every check I wrote, every loan I took out, every investment I liquidated to fund their social climbing had made it easier for them to dismiss the very person who had made their ascent possible. But I didn't understand the full extent of their ingratitude yet. That revelation was still to come. The period between late 2019 and early 2020 brought a level of audacity from my children that I never could have anticipated. Having successfully extracted nearly $800,000 from me for their wedding celebrations, they seemed to view me as an unlimited source of funding for their increasingly grandiose lifestyle aspirations. The first blow came in October 2019, just 4 months after Jasper's wedding. Theodore called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced casualness that I'd learned to associate with expensive requests. "Mom, Miranda and I have been looking at houses in Greenwich," he began without preamble. "We found the perfect property, a colonial estate built in 1923, 6 bedrooms, pool, guest house, the works. It's exactly the kind of home that would position us properly in Connecticut legal circles." I waited for him to get to the point, though I suspected where this conversation was heading. "The thing is, even with both our salaries, we're just short of the down payment the bank requires for a property in this price range. We need about $400,000 to make this work, and we were hoping you might consider it as an investment in our future." $400,000? For a down payment? "Theodore, that's more than half of what I've already spent on your weddings. This is more than many people's entire net worth." "Mom, I understand your concern, but you have to see the bigger picture," Theodore replied with the patience of someone explaining basic math to a child. "Miranda and I have book connections, publishing executives who understand the importance of positioning ourselves in the right social environment. This house isn't just about square footage or pool. It's about community and influence." Once again, I was faced with the same argument, but applied to an even more extravagant expense. But I couldn't help myself. I was still stuck on that number. Theodore, what's the total price of this house?
$2.6 million, he replied, as if that was a perfectly reasonable amount for a young couple to spend on their first home together. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. Son, that's more than most people will earn in their entire lifetime. Are you sure you're being realistic about what you can afford? His response revealed just how far his perspective had shifted from the values I'd tried to instill in him. Mom, you're thinking about this the wrong way. This isn't just a house, it's a strategic asset. The Greenwich address alone opens doors that would otherwise remain closed for decades. Miranda's father says location is everything in building generational wealth, and this property puts us in the same neighborhood as federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, and old money families who control Connecticut's power structures. And what happens if the real estate market declines? What happens if one of you loses your job? How would you make the monthly payments on a mortgage that large? Theodore's laugh was condescending. That's exactly the kind of scarcity thinking that keeps families stuck in the middle class, Mom. Successful people take calculated risks. They leverage opportunities instead of hiding money in conservative investments that barely keep pace with inflation. The implication was clear. My careful financial planning, the very approach that had built the wealth he was now asking me to risk, was somehow inferior to his reckless speculation. I need time to think about this, I told him. Of course, but don't take too long. Properties like this don't stay on the market. If we can't move quickly, we'll lose it to someone with more financial flexibility. The pressure tactics were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Create urgency, position refusal as a failure of vision, make me feel like I was holding back his success through my own timidity. Before I could even process Theodore's request fully, Cordelia called with her own financial emergency. She and Marcus had decided to open a second medical practice in Boston, but they needed $350,000 in startup capital to secure the prime office space they'd identified in the prestigious Back Bay district. Cordelia, I haven't even responded to Theodore's request yet, and now you're asking for another $350,000. She looked genuinely confused by my hesitation. But Theodore's situation is completely different. He's buying personal real estate. This is a business investment with actual revenue potential. The return projections show we could recoup the initial investment within 18 months. And if those projections are wrong? They won't be, she said with absolute confidence. Marcus's father has already committed to referring his overflow patients to our new practice. We're not gambling, we're following a proven business model. The casual way she dismissed my concerns, the assumption that I should simply write massive checks based on their optimistic projections, revealed how completely they had lost sight of the value of money and the risks involved in any business venture. 2 weeks later, Jasper joined the chorus with his own request. He and Alexandra had been offered the opportunity to purchase a stake in Hamilton Engineering, her family's firm, but they needed $500,000 to buy in at the partnership level. This is bigger than anything Theodore or Cordelia is doing, he told me during our phone conversation. We're talking about becoming partners in a firm that designs infrastructure for entire cities. The Hamilton name carries weight in engineering circles that money can't buy, but this partnership opportunity could set our family up for generations. I was drowning in requests that each amounted to more than most families' lifetime savings, being pressured to fund lifestyle choices that were completely divorced from reality. Jasper, even if I liquidated every investment I have, I couldn't fund all 3 of these requests. You are collectively asking me to risk over $1 million on speculative ventures. Mom, you're not thinking strategically, he replied, echoing Theodore's earlier language. These aren't separate requests, they're coordinated investments in our family's collective advancement. Theodore's Greenwich address, Cordelia's Boston practice, and my partnership in Hamilton Engineering create a network of influence that benefits all of us. The coordination was becoming obvious. My children had been discussing my finances among themselves, planning their requests to maximize pressure while making each demand seem reasonable in isolation. But the worst was to come. In December 2019, Penelope finally introduced Nathan's influence directly into the family financial dynamics.
Nathan and Penelope had been engaged for 6 months, and their wedding planning had reached the stage where deposits were required. Nathan and I have been working with the most exclusive wedding planner in Manhattan. The vision we have developed requires a budget of $450,000, but it's going to be absolutely spectacular. The guest list reads like a who's who of New York's cultural elite.
I stared at her across my dining room table, unable to process the audacity of the request. Penelope, I've already spent $800,000 on your siblings' weddings. Now you want me to spend another $500,000 on yours? Nathan cleared his throat and spoke for the first time that evening. Dorothy, if I may, I think you're viewing these expenses incorrectly. What Penelope is describing isn't just a wedding. It's a cultural event that will establish our family's position in New York society permanently. The connections we'll make, the relationships we'll build, the social capital we'll establish, these things have value that extends far beyond the initial investment. Social capital, I repeated. Exactly, Nathan continued smoothly. Your children have already made impressive individual advances, but they're still operating as separate entities. What we're proposing is a coordinated approach to family advancement, where each success builds upon the others to create exponential returns. I looked around the table at my 4 adult children, all nodding along with Nathan's analysis of our family as some kind of business portfolio requiring strategic investment. And what if I can't afford to fund all of these requests? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Theodore spoke with the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum disguised as helpful advice. Mom, we understand that these are significant amounts, but you have to consider the opportunity cost of not investing in our futures. If we miss these chances because of financial constraints, we might never get similar opportunities again. Is preserving your savings really worth potentially limiting your children's lifetime earning potential? They were holding my love for them hostage, using my desire to see them succeed as leverage to pressure me into financial decisions that could bankrupt me. But what they didn't realize was that they had finally pushed me too far. The loving, supportive mother who had always said yes to their dreams was about to discover exactly how much disrespect she was willing to tolerate. The breaking point was coming, and when it arrived, none of them would be prepared for my response. The moment of absolute clarity came on January 15th, 2020 at 3:47 p.m., while I was sitting in my accountant's office staring at a financial projection that made my blood run cold. Harold Pemberton, who had been managing my business finances for over 15 years, had just finished explaining what would happen to my financial security if I continued funding my children's extravagant requests. Dorothy, if you liquidate the investments needed to meet even half of these demands, you'll be putting yourself at serious risk, Harold said, adjusting his glasses as he pointed to the spreadsheet on his computer screen. Your restaurant income is steady, but not infinite. At your age, you should be consolidating wealth, not depleting it for speculative ventures. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Between the wedding expenses I'd already covered and the new requests totaling over $1.7 million, I was looking at potentially spending more than 70% of my net worth on my children's lifestyle choices. What happens if the restaurants hit a slow period? What happens if there's another economic downturn like 2008? Harold's expression was grim. You'd be in serious trouble. At 67, you don't have time to rebuild wealth if these investments don't pan out. And frankly, Dorothy, none of these sound like investments at all. They sound like lifestyle subsidies for people who are living far beyond their means. As I drove home from Harold's office, my mind was reeling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How had I allowed things to get to this point? How had I raised 4 children who felt entitled to financial support that could leave their mother destitute? But the real awakening was still to come.
That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I called Penelope to discuss my financial concerns directly, hoping to have an honest conversation about the sustainability of their collective demands. Penelope, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about these financial requests from you and your siblings. I'm worried that the amounts you're all asking for could seriously impact my long-term security. Her response was everything I needed to hear to understand exactly how my children viewed me. Mom, I think you're being overly dramatic about this, she said with the patient tone of someone humoring an elderly relative. You've been successful with your restaurants for decades. Your assets are substantial. These investments in our futures aren't going to leave you destitute. But what if they don't work out the way you're projecting? What if the real estate market drops, or Cordelia's practice struggles, or... Mom, stop, Penelope interrupted. You're catastrophizing. These aren't risky gambles. They're strategic moves based on careful analysis. Nathan's family has been building wealth for 4 generations. They understand financial strategy in ways that small business owners typically don't. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. My daughter, whose entire education and career had been funded by this small business owner she was now dismissing, was lecturing me on financial strategy. Penelope, every dollar I have was earned through careful planning and hard work. I think I understand financial strategy better than you might realize.
Of course you do, Mom, but there's a difference between managing restaurant cash flow and understanding wealth building at the level we're operating now. Nathan's father could explain the concepts better than I can, but the basic principle is that you have to spend money to make money at scale. I hung up feeling more shaken than I had since Russell walked out on our family 36 years earlier. But I needed to understand if Penelope's attitude was shared by her siblings, or if this was just Nathan's influence on her specifically. So I called Theodore. Theodore, I'm concerned about the financial pressure I'm feeling from all of you. These requests add up to more than I can reasonably afford without jeopardizing my own security. His response was even more revealing than Penelope's. Mom, with all due respect, I think you're underestimating your own financial position. Miranda and I have done some research on local restaurant valuations, and Dorothy's Kitchen alone is probably worth close to $2 million. Add in your other properties and investments, and you're sitting on a substantial estate. My blood ran cold. You've been researching the value of my business? We've all been discussing it, Theodore admitted without apparent shame. Not in a calculating way, but we're family. We should understand our collective financial position so we can make smart decisions about leveraging available resources. Leveraging available resources, Theodore. Those resources belong to me. I earned them. They're not family assets for you to leverage. Mom, that's a very individualistic way of thinking about family wealth. Successful families operate as economic units, pooling resources and opportunities to maximize collective advancement. The money you're holding in conservative investments could be generating much higher returns if deployed strategically through our various ventures. I was listening to my son, whom I'd raised to value independence and hard work, explain why my life savings should be treated as venture capital for his social climbing ambitions. The conversation with Cordelia was equally disturbing. Mom, you seem stressed about money, but I don't understand why. You've always been generous with family support, and these requests aren't really different from what you've done before. The amounts are larger, but so are the opportunities. Cordelia, the amounts aren't just larger, they're potentially catastrophic for my financial security. But that assumes everything goes wrong simultaneously, which isn't realistic. Besides, Mom, you've always said that family comes first. If supporting our advancement means tightening your budget temporarily, isn't that what family sacrifice looks like? She was using my own words about family loyalty to justify bankrupting me. The final conversation with Jasper completed my education about what my children really thought of me. Mom, I think you might be overthinking this.
Yes, these are significant amounts, but you're not exactly living paycheck to paycheck. You have multiple revenue streams, valuable assets, and frankly, at your age, what else are you going to do with all that money? What do you mean by at your age? I just mean you're not planning to start new businesses or make major life changes. Your primary expenses are covered. The logical thing would be to invest in your children's futures while you can still see the benefits of that investment. The logical thing. My youngest son was explaining to me that the logical use of my life savings was funding his partnership in his wife's family business. After hanging up from that final call, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the family photos that covered every surface. Graduation pictures, wedding photos, holiday memories from happier times. I was trying to understand when and how my children had become people who could casually research my net worth, coordinate their financial demands, and lecture me about the logical disposal of my assets. That's when the real realization hit me. They weren't asking for help with opportunities. They were positioning themselves to inherit my wealth while I was still alive, treating me like an aging obstacle to their financial advancement rather than the person who had made their success possible. The most chilling part was their complete lack of concern for my well-being. Not one of them had asked about my retirement plans, my healthcare needs, or my desire for financial security in my later years. They had calculated my net worth and decided how it should be allocated among their various projects without any consideration for the woman who had earned every penny of it. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their mother wasn't the financially naive small-town restaurant owner they apparently thought I was. Over the past 2 decades, I had been quietly working with a team of financial advisors to build something much larger than they realized. And if they wanted to treat me like a convenient source of funding rather than a beloved family member, they were about to learn that this particular source had just run permanently dry. The awakening was complete. Now it was time for action. The morning after my devastating conversations with my children, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I called my private wealth advisor, Elizabeth Sterling, at Sterling & Associates in Hartford. Elizabeth had been quietly managing a portion of my investments since 2008, and our relationship was something my children had never needed to know about.
Dorothy, what a pleasant surprise, Elizabeth said when her secretary put my call through. It's been 6 months since we last spoke. How are the restaurants doing? The restaurants are fine, Elizabeth, but I need to discuss my broader financial picture. Something's come up with my family that requires me to make some significant decisions about asset protection. There was a pause. Elizabeth had been in wealth management long enough to recognize the tone of a client dealing with family financial pressure. Would you prefer to handle this over the phone, or should we schedule a meeting? A meeting, please. And Elizabeth, I need you to prepare a complete portfolio summary. Everything. I think it's time my children learned exactly what they've been dealing with. Elizabeth's knowing chuckle told me she understood exactly what kind of family situation I was navigating. 2 days later, I sat in Elizabeth's corner office on the 30th floor of the Hartford Financial Center, looking out over the Connecticut River while she walked me through documents that told a very different story about my financial position than the one my children had constructed in their minds. Let's start with the restaurant holdings, Elizabeth said, opening the first folder. Dorothy's Kitchen and your 2 satellite locations are valued at approximately $4.2 million, based on the most recent commercial property assessments and business valuations. The land alone has appreciated significantly since you purchased it. I nodded. This was roughly what my children had calculated in their research. But of course, that represents only about 15% of your total portfolio. Elizabeth continued with a slight smile. The next folder contained information that would have shocked my children into silence. The real estate investment trust we established in 2009 now holds properties valued at $8.7 million. The diversified stock portfolio has grown to $6.3 million. Your municipal bonds and treasury investments total $3.1 million. And then there are the more specialized investments. Elizabeth opened another folder, revealing documents related to investments my children couldn't have possibly known about. The Renewable Energy Fund has performed exceptionally well, current value $2.8 million. Your stake in the Hartford Technology Incubator has grown to $1.9 million. The Pharmaceutical Research Fund is valued at $1.6 million, and your International Emerging Markets portfolio has reached $2.4 million. I watched the numbers climb, remembering the careful decisions Elizabeth and I had made over the past 12 years to diversify my wealth far beyond the restaurant business. "What's the total portfolio value?" I asked, though I knew the approximate figure. "As of yesterday's close, your total investable assets are valued at $31.7 million. $31.7 million. My children thought they were dealing with a small-town restaurant owner who maybe had $3 million in assets. They had no idea they were attempting to manipulate one of the wealthiest women in central Connecticut. "Elizabeth, I need to tell you why I'm here," I said, and proceeded to explain the escalating financial demands, the coordinated pressure tactics, and the devastating conversations that had revealed my children's true attitudes toward me and my money. Elizabeth listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing increasingly serious as I described the scope of their entitlement. "Dorothy, what you're describing is financial elder abuse. The fact that they've researched your assets, coordinated their demands, and are pressuring you to liquidate investments for their personal benefit, these are serious red flags." "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "But they're my children. I raised them. I funded their educations, their weddings, their careers. How did I create people who could treat me this way?" Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "In my experience, people who grow up with financial security sometimes lose sight of how that security was created. Your children have never experienced true financial hardship, so they don't understand the value of the wealth you've built. They see it as a resource to be accessed rather than a lifetime of work to be preserved." She opened another folder, this one containing estate planning documents. "Now, let's discuss your options. Your current will leaves your entire estate divided equally among your 4 children, correct?" "That's right. I've always assumed they would use their inheritance wisely, maybe continue the restaurant business, take care of each other, but after this week, I'm not sure I trust their judgment with that kind of money." Elizabeth nodded knowingly. "We can change that. There are several strategies for protecting your assets while sending a clear message about consequences for entitled behavior." Over the next 2 hours, Elizabeth outlined various approaches to restructuring my estate plan. We could create educational trusts that only paid out for legitimate expenses. We could establish charitable foundations that would honor my values while limiting my children's access. We could set up conditions that required demonstrated financial responsibility before inheritance distribution. But as we talked, a different idea began forming in my mind. Something more dramatic. Something that would force my children to confront the reality of their behavior while actually doing more good in the world than simply transferring wealth to people who had never learned to appreciate it.
"Elizabeth, what if I donated it all?" She raised an eyebrow. "All of it?" "The majority. What if I kept enough to maintain my comfortable retirement, but donated the rest to causes that actually need the money, to organizations that are doing work that matters?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "That's certainly possible. We'd need to structure it carefully for tax efficiency, and you'd want to maintain enough liquid assets for your own security, but yes, it's absolutely feasible." As she spoke, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement. Not the anxious anticipation of my children's next financial demand, but genuine enthusiasm for the possibility of using my wealth to make a real difference.
I've been thinking about this for years, I continued, the idea gaining momentum as I spoke. There are so many organizations struggling to fund important work, educational programs for underprivileged children, healthcare initiatives for rural communities, scholarship funds for students whose parents can't afford to send them to college. Elizabeth began making notes as I outlined my vision. We could establish a foundation focused on supporting single mothers starting small businesses. I know firsthand how difficult that journey is and how much difference a little financial support can make. We could fund scholarships specifically for students from working-class families who want to pursue careers in healthcare, education, or community service. The more I talked about it, the clearer my path became. My children wanted to treat my money as their entitlement. Fine. They could watch it go to people who would actually appreciate the opportunities it could create. There's something poetic about this approach, Elizabeth observed. Your children seem to believe they deserve your wealth because of their connection to you. But there are thousands of young people out there who embody the values you tried to instill in your own children. Hard work, gratitude, service to others. Why not invest in them instead? By the end of our meeting, we had outlined a plan that would accomplish several goals simultaneously. I would maintain enough assets to live comfortably for the rest of my life. A modest amount would be set aside for each of my children, enough to help with genuine emergencies, but not enough to fund their extravagant lifestyle choices. The vast majority of my wealth would go towards establishing the Dorothy Whitfield Foundation, focused on supporting hardworking individuals from modest backgrounds who are trying to build better lives for themselves and their families. How long will it take to restructure everything? I asked. Given the complexity and size of the estate, probably 6 to 8 weeks to have all the documents finalized and the foundation legally established. Perfect. That would give me time to plan exactly how I wanted to communicate this decision to my children. As I drove home from Hartford that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. My children thought they were dealing with a financially naive mother who could be pressured into funding their social climbing ambitions. Instead, they had awakened a woman who understood exactly how powerful financial independence could be and who was about to use that power to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The best part was, they had no idea what was coming. The confrontation I'd been planning for 3 weeks finally arrived on February 28, 2020, exactly 6 weeks after my awakening moment in Harold's office. I had invited all 4 of my children and their spouses to dinner at my house on Elmwood Avenue, telling them I was ready to discuss their various financial requests and wanted to address our family's future together. They arrived with the eager confidence of people who believed they were about to receive very good news. Theodore and Miranda were practically glowing when they walked through my front door, clearly expecting to hear about the Greenwich House down payment. Cordelia and Marcus brought a bottle of expensive champagne, presumably to celebrate the Boston medical practice funding. Jasper and Alexandra carried a gift bag containing what looked like partnership documents for Hamilton Engineering. And Penelope arrived with Nathan, both dressed as if they were attending a business meeting rather than a family dinner. "Mom, this is so exciting," Penelope said as she hugged me in the foyer. "Nathan has been helping me think through the best way to structure the wedding financing, and we have some really innovative ideas about how to maximize the return on your investment." Nathan shook my hand with his practiced charm. "Dorothy, I want you to know how much I appreciate your generosity toward our family. The strategic approach we're taking with these coordinated investments is going to transform the Whitfield legacy for generations to come." I smiled politely and led them all into the dining room, where I had prepared what would likely be our last family meal together for a very long time. Throughout dinner, the conversation was dominated by their various projects and the exciting opportunities that my financial support would make possible. They had clearly coordinated their presentations, each one building on the others to create a comprehensive picture of family advancement through strategic wealth deployment.
Theodore spoke enthusiastically about the Greenwich House and how the address alone would accelerate his path to partnership at his firm. Cordelia detailed the projected revenue streams from the Boston practice expansion. Jasper explained the long-term benefits of joining the Hamilton Engineering Partnership, and Penelope described the cultural impact and networking potential of their Manhattan wedding celebration.
Nathan served as the unofficial moderator, weaving their individual requests into a cohesive narrative about family success and generational wealth building. It was an impressive performance, clearly rehearsed and strategically choreographed to maximize their chances of securing my funding. The beautiful thing about this approach, Nathan concluded as we finished the main course, is that we're not asking you to spend money, we're asking you to invest in proven strategies that will benefit our entire family tree for decades to come. I nodded thoughtfully, allowing them to finish their presentations completely before responding. I have to say, you've all put a lot of thought into this, I began, my voice calm and measured. The coordination is impressive, the projections are optimistic, the vision is certainly ambitious. They leaned forward expectantly, smiles spreading across their faces as they prepared to receive my blessing and my checkbook. But I'm afraid my answer is no. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Theodore was the first to recover. Mom, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're proposing. These aren't individual requests anymore. This is a comprehensive family investment strategy. I understand perfectly, I replied. You've researched my assets, calculated my net worth, and devised a plan to access the majority of my wealth for your personal projects. What I don't understand is when my children became people who would pressure their elderly mother to liquidate her life savings to fund their lifestyle aspirations. Miranda jumped in quickly. Dorothy, that's not fair. We're not talking about lifestyle spending. These are legitimate business investments with solid return projections. Are they? I asked. Theodore, what happens if the real estate market declines and your Greenwich house loses value? Do you plan to make up my losses? That's not going to happen, Theodore replied defensively. Greenwich real estate has been appreciating consistently for decades. So did real estate everywhere until 2008, I pointed out. Cordelia, what happens if your Boston practice doesn't attract the affluent patients you're projecting? What happens if Marcus's father's referrals don't materialize as expected? Cordelia looked uncomfortable. Mom, we've done extensive market research. The demand for boutique cardiac care in Boston is well documented. Market research, I repeated. Done by whom? Because I've spent 40 years actually running businesses, and I can tell you that projections and reality are often very different things. Nathan tried to regain control of the conversation. Dorothy, I think what's happening here is a natural generational difference in risk tolerance. Your approach to wealth building has been necessarily conservative, given your background and the era when you were establishing yourself. But your children are operating in a different economic environment, with different opportunities. I turned my full attention to Nathan, this man who had poisoned my family's values and convinced them that their mother's life work was somehow inferior to their social climbing ambitions. Nathan, let me be very clear about something. You seem to be under the impression that I'm a financially naive, small-town restaurant owner who doesn't understand sophisticated investment strategies. That impression is incorrect. I stood up from the table and walked to the sideboard where I had placed a manila envelope containing documents from my meeting with Elizabeth Sterling. I think it's time you all learned exactly who you've been trying to manipulate. I opened the envelope and began placing documents on the table: portfolio statements, investment summaries, property valuations, and business assessments. My restaurant holdings are valued at $4.2 million. My diversified stock portfolio is worth $6.3 million. My real estate investment trust holds properties valued at $8.7 million. My municipal bonds and treasury investments total $3.1 million. I continued placing papers as my children stared in shocked silence. My renewable energy investments are valued at $2.8 million.
My stake in various technology and pharmaceutical funds totals $4.5 million. My international investment portfolio is worth $2.4 million. Theodore's face had gone pale. Cordelia was staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Jasper's mouth was hanging open. Penelope looked like she might faint. My total net worth, I continued calmly, is just over $31 million. The silence in the room was deafening. Nathan was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. Dorothy, this changes the entire conversation. If your assets are this substantial, then the investments we're proposing represent a much smaller percentage of your total wealth than we realized. You're right, I agreed, which makes your pressure tactics even more insulting. You weren't trying to convince me to make reasonable family investments. You were trying to manipulate someone you thought was financially vulnerable into risking her security for your social climbing aspirations.
Mom, that's not... Theodore started, but I held up my hand to stop him. I'm not finished. Over the past month, I've listened to each of you lecture me about financial strategy, wealth building, and investment opportunities. You've dismissed my small business owner mentality, questioned what I would do with my money at my age, and coordinated pressure tactics to access what you believed were limited family resources. I looked around the table at these people I had raised, educated, and supported through every challenge of their lives. But the most disturbing thing isn't your financial manipulation. It's your complete transformation into people I don't recognize. You've become entitled, ungrateful, and so obsessed with social status that you're willing to financially exploit your own mother to achieve it. Mom, please, Cordelia whispered, tears forming in her eyes. We never meant to hurt you. Didn't you? I asked. Because when I expressed concerns about my financial security, not one of you asked about my retirement needs, my health care plans, or my desire to maintain independence. You calculated my net worth and decided how it should be allocated among your projects, without any consideration for the woman who earned every penny of it. I gathered the financial documents and returned them to the envelope. So, here's what's going to happen. I will not be funding any of your requests. Not the Greenwich House, not the Boston practice, not the engineering partnership, and certainly not a $450,000 wedding celebration. You are all successful adults with good careers. If you want these things, you can earn them yourselves. The room erupted in protests, pleas, and attempts at negotiation, but I held up my hand for silence. I'm not finished. Since you've all expressed such confidence in your ability to succeed without your mother's naive financial approaches, I'm giving you the opportunity to prove it. My will has been changed. Instead of inheriting my estate, the vast majority of my wealth will be donated to establish a foundation supporting hardworking people from modest backgrounds who appreciate the value of opportunity. The protests stopped immediately. Pure shock registered on every face around the table. You've taught me something important about family loyalty and gratitude. You've shown me exactly what happens when people take love and generosity for granted. So I'm redirecting my resources toward people who still understand that success is earned, not inherited. Nathan found his voice first. Dorothy, you can't be serious. This is your family's generational wealth. You're talking about throwing away decades of family building. No, Nathan, I replied firmly. I'm talking about honoring the values that built this wealth in the first place, values that my children have apparently outgrown. Theodore stood up abruptly.
Mom, you're making a huge mistake. We can work this out. We can find a compromise that makes everyone happy. The time for compromise was before you decided to treat me like a convenient funding source rather than your mother. You made your choice when you told me that we're adults now and you don't need me. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for. The aftermath of that dinner was swift and more revealing than I could have anticipated. Within 24 hours of learning about my changed will and their lost inheritance, my children's true characters emerged with a clarity that was both devastating and liberating. Theodore was the first to call at 7:30 a.m. the morning after our confrontation. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, I've been up all night thinking about what you said, and I think you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. You're essentially punishing us for having ambition, for wanting to build something bigger than what we inherited." "Theodore, what exactly did you inherit?" I asked calmly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. I mean, the opportunities you provided, the education, the foundation you gave us, all of which you've used to become successful adults with good careers. What more were you expecting to inherit? Well, naturally, we assumed that as your children, we'd be the beneficiaries of your estate. That's how families work. Wealth gets passed down through generations. Wealth gets passed down to people who honor the values that created it, I corrected. Tell me, Theodore, what values did I teach you when you were growing up? Another pause. Hard work, integrity, family loyalty? And which of those values were you demonstrating when you researched my net worth without my knowledge, coordinated financial demands with your siblings, and pressured me to liquidate my retirement security for your house down payment? The silence stretched on until he finally hung up without another word. Cordelia's approach was different. She arrived at my house unannounced that evening, tears streaming down her face, begging for another chance. "Mom, please, you have to understand, Marcus and I never meant to be manipulative. We are just excited about the opportunities, and maybe we got carried away with the planning. But we love you. We respect everything you've accomplished." I invited her in and made tea, hoping we might be able to have an honest conversation about what had gone wrong in our relationship. "Cordelia, when did you stop seeing me as your mother and start seeing me as a source of funding?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "I never stopped seeing you as my mother, but Mom, you have so much money, and we have so many opportunities. Isn't it natural for family wealth to support family advancement?"
"Whose wealth?" I asked quietly. "Well, yours, of course. But isn't family wealth ultimately collective? Don't successful parents want to see their children build on that success?" Even in her tearful apology, Cordelia couldn't grasp that my money belonged to me, not to some collective family entity she had voting rights in. "Sweetheart, I spent 30 years building wealth so that I could be secure in my retirement and help my children when they faced genuine emergencies. I never intended for that wealth to become an expectation, a resource you felt entitled to access for lifestyle choices." "But we're not talking about lifestyle choices," she protested. "We're talking about business investments, career advancement, strategic opportunities. You're talking about a $275,000 wedding, a $350,000 medical practice expansion you can't afford without my money, and a lifestyle that requires constant financial support from your mother. How is that different from lifestyle choices?" She left that evening without any real understanding of why her behavior had been problematic, still convinced that my refusal to fund her dreams was somehow unfair to the family unit. Jasper's response was the most disturbing. He showed up 3 days later with Alexandra and her father, Hamilton himself, clearly hoping that family pressure would force me to reconsider. "Mrs. Whitfield," Hamilton said in the practiced tone of someone used to getting his way through intimidation, "I understand there's been some family miscommunication about financial planning, Alexandra tells me you're considering disinheriting your children over what amounts to normal family business discussions. Mr. Hamilton, my estate planning decisions are not your business, nor are they subject to negotiation by my children's in-laws. His demeanor shifted immediately. Actually, they might be more my business than you realize. Jasper and Alexandra have already committed to the partnership opportunity based on your previous generous support for family ventures. If you withdraw that support now, it could impact their ability to meet their financial obligations to our firm. The threat was barely veiled. They had made commitments based on money they didn't have, counting on my support, and now expected me to honor obligations I'd never agreed to. Then I suggest Jasper and Alexandra reconsider commitments they can't afford, I replied calmly. I'm not responsible for financial decisions made without consulting me. Jasper looked mortified, but he didn't speak up to defend me against his father-in-law's pressure tactics. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. The most heartbreaking response came from Penelope. 2 weeks after the dinner, she sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter that I found in my mailbox on a rainy March morning. Dear Mom, I've been trying to understand what went wrong between us, and I think the problem is that we're operating from different generational perspectives on money and success. Your approach to wealth building was appropriate for your era and circumstances, but Nathan has helped me understand that there are more sophisticated strategies available to families at our level. I love you and respect everything you've accomplished, but I think you're making a mistake by letting emotional reactions override sound financial planning. The foundation idea sounds noble, but those strangers will never care about you the way your family does. Nathan and I have decided to postpone our wedding indefinitely while we reassess our financial situation. I hope you're happy with the impact your decision has had on our family's future. Love, Penelope. The letter confirmed my worst fears about Nathan's influence on my daughter. Even in her attempt to reconcile, she was parroting his condescending language about my generational perspective and emotional reactions. She had completely absorbed his narrative that my careful financial planning was somehow primitive compared to their sophisticated social climbing strategies. More telling was her assumption that postponing an extravagant wedding was some kind of punishment I had inflicted, rather than a reasonable response to not having unlimited access to someone else's money. But the most revealing consequence came 6 weeks later, when my attorney, Elizabeth Sterling, called with news that shouldn't have surprised me, but still left me stunned. Dorothy, I thought you should know that all 4 of your children have consulted attorneys about contesting your will. They're exploring whether they can challenge your mental competency or claim undue influence from outside advisors. They're trying to have me declared incompetent? I asked, though I probably should have seen this coming. It's a common tactic when beneficiaries feel they've been unfairly disinherited. They'll argue that no reasonable person would donate $30 million to charity instead of leaving it to their children. They'll claim you're not thinking clearly or that I somehow manipulated you into changing your estate plan. The irony was staggering. My children, who had spent months trying to manipulate me into funding their lifestyle choices, were now claiming that I was the victim of manipulation when I refused to comply with their demands. What are their chances of success? I asked. Elizabeth laughed dryly. Given the extensive documentation we have of your financial sophistication, the clear, rational basis for your decisions, and the evidence of their coordinated pressure tactics, essentially zero. But the process will be expensive and emotionally draining for everyone involved.
That evening, I sat in my living room looking at the family photos that still covered every surface, and I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. My children had revealed themselves completely. They weren't people who'd been temporarily corrupted by bad influences. They were adults who believed they were entitled to my life's work simply by virtue of being born into my family. Their attempts to challenge my will, to have me declared incompetent, to use legal pressure to access money I'd chosen to donate to charity, these weren't the actions of people who loved and respected me. These were the actions of people who viewed me as an obstacle to their financial advancement. The legal challenge lasted 8 months and cost them collectively over $300,000 in attorney fees, money they could have used for the business ventures they claimed were so important. When it finally concluded with a complete vindication of my mental competency and estate planning decisions, none of them called to apologize. Instead, I received a final letter from Theodore, apparently writing on behalf of all 4 siblings. Since you've made it clear that your charitable interests are more important to you than your family's welfare, we think it's best if we limit future contact to necessary occasions only. We're disappointed in your choices, but we respect your right to dispose of your assets as you see fit. We hope you find fulfillment in your philanthropic endeavors. The letter was signed by all 4 children, but the coldly formal language was pure Nathan Blackstone. Even in their final communication, they couldn't resist one last manipulation, positioning themselves as the mature, reasonable parties who were graciously accepting my disappointing choices. But I wasn't disappointed. I was liberated. For the first time in years, I was free to use my resources to help people who would actually appreciate the opportunities. People who understood that success was earned, not inherited, and that generosity was a gift, not an obligation. The Dorothy Whitfield Foundation was about to begin its real work. 2 years have passed since that final letter from my children, and I can honestly say, these have been the most fulfilling years of my life since those early days when I was building my business from nothing. The Dorothy Whitfield Foundation officially launched in September 2020, and the impact we've been able to make has exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Our first scholarship recipient was Maria Santos, a single mother from Hartford who was working 2 jobs while pursuing her nursing degree at the local community college. When Maria walked into our office for her interview, I saw myself 40 years ago, exhausted, determined, and desperate for just one break that could change everything. "Mrs. Whitfield," Maria said, clutching her worn portfolio of transcripts and letters of recommendation, "I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. I've been trying to finish nursing school for 3 years, but every time I get close, life happens. Car repairs, childcare emergencies, medical bills. This scholarship means I can finally focus on my studies instead of constantly worrying about how to pay for them." Sitting across from Maria, I realized something profound. This conversation was more meaningful than any interaction I'd had with my own children in the past 5 years. Maria understood the value of what she was receiving because she knew how hard it was to earn. She appreciated the opportunity because she understood how rare genuine support could be. Our second major initiative was the Small Business Mothers Grant Program, which provides startup funding for women starting businesses while raising children alone. Our first recipient, Jennifer Walsh, used her $25,000 grant to launch a home-based accounting service that now employs 6 other single mothers in the Cedarville area. "You gave me more than money," Jennifer told me during our 6-month follow-up meeting. "You gave me the confidence to believe that my dreams were valid, that being a single mother didn't disqualify me from being a successful entrepreneur. My kids now see their mother as someone who builds things, creates jobs, contributes to the community. That's a legacy that goes beyond any financial return." These conversations, filled with genuine gratitude, authentic determination, and real appreciation for opportunity, have healed something in my heart that I didn't even realize was broken. The foundation now supports 43 scholarship recipients, has funded 12 small business startups, and operates a mentorship program that pairs successful local business owners with emerging entrepreneurs. Every success story reinforces my decision to redirect my wealth toward people who understand that opportunity is precious and success is earned. But perhaps the most satisfying development has been watching my children navigate the consequences of their choices. Theodore and Miranda never did buy their Greenwich mansion. Without my financial support, they couldn't secure the mortgage, and the property was eventually purchased by another family.
Theodore remains at his law firm, still chasing the partnership that seems perpetually just out of reach. According to mutual acquaintances, he's become increasingly bitter about missed opportunities, frequently complaining that his career advancement has been hampered by inadequate financial backing. Miranda left him 8 months ago. Apparently, she'd married him with certain expectations about lifestyle and social position that weren't materializing quickly enough. The divorce was expensive and contentious, with Theodore losing a significant portion of his assets to someone who never loved him for anything beyond his potential wealth.
Cordelia and Marcus also scaled back their plans dramatically. The Boston medical practice expansion never happened, and their marriage has reportedly been strained by constant arguments about money and lifestyle expectations. Marcus's family connections, which had seemed so valuable when they were counting on my financial support, proved less helpful when they actually needed to generate income rather than access existing wealth. Cordelia sent me a Christmas card last year, the first contact I'd had with any of my children since their final letter. It contained no personal message, just a generic holiday greeting and a family photo showing her, Marcus, and their new baby. She looked tired and older than her years, but the baby was beautiful. I wondered if becoming a mother herself might help her understand what she'd lost when she chose greed over gratitude. Jasper's engineering partnership never materialized either. The Hamilton family apparently had little interest in supporting someone who couldn't contribute the expected capital. And Jasper's relationship with Alexandra deteriorated rapidly once it became clear that the financial benefits they'd anticipated from our family connection wouldn't materialize. The most dramatic consequence befell Penelope and Nathan. Their postponed wedding was eventually canceled entirely when Nathan broke off the engagement to pursue a relationship with someone from a family with more accessible wealth. Penelope was devastated, having spent 2 years planning her life around someone who ultimately viewed her as a disappointing investment rather than a beloved partner. Through the small-town gossip network that thrives in places like Cedarville, I learned that Penelope had moved back to Connecticut and taken a position at a regional museum, a significant step down from her prestigious Manhattan job. She's reportedly living alone in a modest apartment and has avoided all social gatherings where she might encounter people who knew about her previous engagement and lavish lifestyle plans. I felt no satisfaction in learning about these developments. These were my children, after all, and their struggles brought me no joy. But I also felt no guilt about my role in their difficulties. They were experiencing the natural consequences of choices they'd made as adults, choices to prioritize status over substance, appearances over authenticity, and entitlement over gratitude. More importantly, their struggles were helping me understand the difference between love and enablement. For years, I'd believed that supporting their dreams financially was an expression of maternal love. What I'd actually been doing was preventing them from developing the resilience, resourcefulness, and genuine appreciation that come from earning success through personal effort. The foundation work has also introduced me to a community of people I never would have met through my previous life focused on family obligations. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who serves on our scholarship selection committee, became a close friend and traveling companion. Margaret Chen, no relation to my former financial concerns, runs a nonprofit supporting elder care and has become a trusted advisor on foundation operations. These relationships are built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than financial expectations or family obligations. When Patricia and I travel together, she pays her own way and appreciates the experiences for their intrinsic value. When Margaret and I work together on foundation projects, she contributes her expertise and energy without any expectation of personal financial benefit.
Last month, Maria Santos graduated from nursing school with highest honors and immediately secured a position in the pediatric intensive care unit at Hartford Hospital. At her graduation ceremony, she gave a speech about the power of opportunity and the responsibility that comes with receiving support from others. Someone believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. But more than that, someone taught me that success isn't about what you acquire. It's about what you contribute. The greatest gift I received wasn't financial support, though that was crucial. It was the reminder that my dreams mattered, that my struggles had value, and that there are still people in this world who help others without expecting anything in return. After the ceremony, Maria introduced me to her 2 children, a 7-year-old boy who wants to be a doctor when he grows up, and a 9-year-old girl who announced that she's going to start her own business helping people, just like the nice lady who helped her mommy. Those children understand something my own children never learned, that generosity is a gift to be treasured, not a right to be demanded. As I sit in my study this evening, looking out at the garden where I now grow vegetables to donate to the local food bank, I'm struck by how much lighter my life feels without the constant pressure of financial demands for my children. I sleep better, worry less, and wake up excited about the work I'm doing rather than anxious about the next expensive request. The relationships I've lost were built on transactional foundations that couldn't survive the removal of financial incentives. The relationships I've gained are built on mutual respect, shared purposes, and genuine appreciation for each other's company. I've learned that real family isn't about blood connections or legal obligations. It's about people who value you for who you are, rather than what you can provide. My foundation recipients send me updates about their progress because they want to share their success with someone who cares, not because they're angling for additional support.
My advice to anyone facing similar family financial pressure is this: love doesn't require you to bankrupt yourself for other people's dreams. Generosity shouldn't be expected, demanded, or taken for granted. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for entitled adult children is to let them experience the consequences of their choices. The money I didn't spend on my children's lifestyle ambitions has instead created opportunities for dozens of hardworking people who understand the value of what they're receiving. Maria Santos will save lives as a pediatric nurse. Jennifer Walsh employs 6 women who can now support their families independently. 43 students are pursuing careers in education, healthcare, and community service because someone believed their dreams were worth investing in. That's a legacy I'm proud of. Not wealth passed down through bloodlines, but opportunities created for people who will use them to build better lives and stronger communities. My children taught me an invaluable lesson, though not the one they intended. They showed me that giving away money to people who appreciate it brings infinitely more joy than spending money on people who expect it. And for that lesson, despite everything, I suppose I should thank them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.